So first off, I just have to say that I love this industry. It's really, really exciting. My background is data platforms. Before that, AI. I did venture capital for a little while. I've seen quite a few things, both on the tech side, business side. And it really is an interesting and fascinating point in history when we see an industry that consumes 8% of GDP looking so broadly at technologies, all the different things that are available. And we've seen all the sorts of things that are coming out that we're looking at, from AI, blockchain, all these sorts of things. And it's really exciting to see an industry this big looking full scope across them. What needs to come with it, though, is figuring out the core that's going to go underneath all of it and needs to walk in lockstep with it in order to see it. So if I may pick on AI for a moment, I love AI. I'm published in AI. I used to research AI. If there were an AI talk going on right now, also picking out because there isn't one going on right now, I'd say if you want to talk about AI, you should be down at that talk. If you want to use AI, you should be right here because the things that are holding you back aren't AI. As a researcher, I spent 90% of my time curating data and connecting to systems and 10% at most actually dealing with AI. So we need to figure out our core because there's a whole lot of change coming. This is stuff that we all know about, that your expense ratio is going to have to come down if you want to compete. You're going to have more products out because there's new kinds of channels, but even existing products are being segmented into additional products. You're going to have to get the market faster. You're going to have more distribution channels. You're going to have to evaluate more technologies, and there's so many technologies to evaluate. This is a ticking time bomb for the competitive marketplace. Market share is going to shift hands. And now we find ourselves in InsurTech conferences. I love it. I do love all the technologies that we're looking at, but often these can turn into these like insecurity-driven shame fests about all the stuff I'm not researching. Like, what is my blockchain strategy? What is my vehicle telemetry strategy? How are we going to do this? Oh my gosh. And then the real problem is that I go here, I learn about AI, I learn about blockchain, and then I go back to my office tomorrow and I wonder why my claims upgrade is 2 years overdue and over budget. That's the world that we're living in. And we're living in a double-minded world. And we're not going to discover these things until we fix that problem. So this is this is what we end up with if we try to bring those things back home. Apologies for the people in the middle, hard to see over there, but this is our reality. So what am I going to talk to here? My name is Dan Woods, as introduced. I'm CEO of Socotra. Socotra is looking at the core. Although I'm going to be talking a bit about the industry generally, we weave in a little bit, and we're going to cover really three things. I'm going to keep it simple: where we are, where we're going, and how on earth we're going to get there. And I think we all know where we are. I think I just touched on that, and I think I may have given a few people PTSD over in this direction, but that's what we're going to cover. So where is it that we're going? Well, let's envision for a moment the insurance technology of the future. And when I say of the future, maybe I'm a sci-fi nerd, but I feel it should be an echo of the future. And we're going to have some kind of a core, whatever that means. And this core is going to have to connect to our distribution channels. We're going to have apps. We're going to have like agents. We're going to have some future distribution channel we can't even imagine now. Somehow that's going to connect to our core. We have to have AI. We're going to have some Internet of Things integration. There's all sorts of new data sources coming in all over the place. They somehow have to fit into my data model. And oh my gosh, I'm behind the times if I don't have blockchain. And somehow on top of all of that, this magical core needs to have high reliability, fast product releases, easy upgrades, and somehow be expandable to all future needs. Now, while we're sitting here figuring out what our AI situation is going to be, what AI we're going to use, and Internet of Things, and satellite imagery, and all that sort of stuff, the truth of the matter is, if we're not figuring out our core can't handle our problems today. Think of the problems that you're dealing with back at home and the upgrade that's over budget and these sorts of things. We're dealing with a core that can't handle the problems today, and we somehow believe that without planning, it's going to handle these problems tomorrow. What kind of magical thing do we think is going to happen that's going to actually make this happen? I have a little unicorn at a computer. I think that's, if we sat back and thought about it, that might be what we think is actually going to happen here. So that's the scary part, but the good news is as a tech industry, as a species, we've solved this problem before. We've done this in other industries. I'm going to use my phone here as an example. Bear with me. Think for a moment all the stuff your phone does. If some guy came up to you in 1985 and said, you know what, every day you're going to have a calculator in your pocket everywhere you go. Really? You have a calculator? Yeah, you're going to have a calculator in your pocket. And you're going to be able to get mail on it. And by the way, you're also going to have a camcorder with you everywhere you go. Really? Yeah, you're going to have a camcorder with you. And you're going to have a gaming system. Well, I don't play games, so you're going to have one anyway. And actually, you're going to have every Nintendo game ever made in your pocket. And you're going to have not just your whole CD collection, every song ever written in your pocket. It's like, really? You're going to have that? Yes, yes, yes. And then like you're even going to have a flashlight. And it's like, OK, now you're screwing with me. This is kind of weird. So, and then on top of it, you're going to be able to get a ride, order a meal, and find a date. I mean, how cool is this? You couldn't, think about this. How on earth do we get here? And it's because we actually productize the data platform. This is the power of a productized data platform. We've seen this in other industries, and it just hasn't gotten to insurance yet. That's what I'm passionate about. That's what Socotra was started for. But I'll spare that for now. So what happened was the platform isn't just the hardware and hard-coded applications. You have your hardware, storage, operating system. These things are flexible. But most interestingly, they created a data model that represents contacts, events, history, media, different kinds of media, connectivity, internet connectivity, these sorts of things. And then they locked it all down. You can't change those things. And there's a well-defined interface for interacting with them. And on the other side of that interface is anything you want. And that's where the apps live. So there are only 3 ways to interact with a product platform. Configure it. Interact with the APIs, most notably through apps in the case of your phone. And there may be some kind of default UI. Notice what's not on the list. What's not on this list is change the code. What's not on this list is call the manufacturer. If you call the manufacturer, what they're going to do is they're going to say, have you found a bug? If you haven't found a bug, here's the documentation. You can figure it out. Here's maybe a training or something like that. But the point is, they've provided everything that you need in order to develop those apps to create the things that you need. It took some discipline because like this thing doesn't look like a flashlight. Imagine the flashlight guy who's just like, this isn't a very good flashlight. I mean, what the heck? They found a way to make it work and meet the needs for more things, and as a result, expand it to even greater needs. All right. So let's take an example closer to home. Let's talk about the cloud. Cloud did the exact same thing. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, the idea that like I'd let someone else pick up. I mean, I'm an old hardware geek. I mean, I used to pick out, like, read specs, tech specs and performance specs on motherboards to pick them out and figure out what RAM timings I need and all that sort of stuff. I was a total geek on that. And then the cloud comes along and says, like, no, you're just going to use, you're not even going to know what hardware you're using. You're not going to know. You can't change it. There's nothing you can do. But we'll tell you what the specs are of it, and you'll pay according to the specs. And begrudgingly, because it meant throwing out a lot of now useless knowledge, I discovered that this was the way that things were going. And similarly, there's a line, and on the other side of that, you can do anything you want. And there's now like a vibrant marketplace of cloud architectures, cloud products. And how do you interact with these things? Same thing. You can configure it. You have an API. In this case, it's too low level. There's no default UI, but you certainly don't have any more power to interact with it. You can't tell them that you want to move the data center down the street. You can't tell them that you don't like Intel processors or you like NVIDIA chips or anything like that. They have very carefully, just like the phone platform, they've very carefully separated out what are the parts that actually differentiate your application from someone else's. And it's not RAM timing. And it's not where exactly the data center is, unless it's a legal jurisdiction issue. So what have been the results? As I said, in 2006, this came out. It sounded a little crazy. Like, my data center is going to be the same as yours. And then fast forward a decade, and a lot of industries, a lot of companies, including ours, have basically taken an attitude of, like, we're done buying servers. We've bought our last server. We are an enterprise software company that's never bought a server. And it doesn't make sense to buy a server anymore. This is how far it's gone in 10 years. Insurance is a little more risk averse. It's catching up. But it's going to end up in the same space. We get all these benefits. You probably know what these are. The quality's through the roof. You get instant scaling as big as you need. Rapid deployment. Stand up a server fast. You get continual advances with the industry. And one great thing is the security actually goes up. You want a HIPAA compliant server? You can get that way faster. Amazon even has in the US a classified cloud. You can actually get a classified server in like 8 seconds. Like, this is insane. And we have lots of examples of tech companies, like actual tech companies who most of their employees are engineers and they're building things on the cloud. Now I'd ask you, if Expedia, with all their engineers, believes that they do not have the expertise that's worth their time to maintain a data center, why does an insurance company? And we have a rich marketplace of all of these. You know that. I just love to point this out because when you look at the years they started, you notice there's one crazy company that did it 4 years before the others. That's called foreshadowing. So what does this look like if we apply it to insurance? The cloud's great, but the cloud is a little more generic than we need for insurance, because if you spin up an Amazon server, that thing could be used equally easily for a corporate file server, or to back some kind of a web app, or for a graduate student's research project. It doesn't care. Extremely horizontally. Spin up a server, and the server says, hello, here I am, I don't know anything. And you have to do everything from there. Well, with insurance, we do know a lot more about what we want to accomplish. We know that we want to represent policies and claims, and we want to represent exposures and perils and covers and endorsements and invoices and policyholders and all the events that happen. We want to tie to general ledgers. We want to tie it to reporting. We know that those things need to happen, and they really need to happen at every insured. So what would it look like if we just productized that stack up a little bit? This is what we're doing. We're the only ones doing it today. I'm sure others are going to follow. But this is the direction the industry is headed in. So in this example, we have our cloud infrastructure and all the physical hardware stuff below that, provided by your cloud provider. And then we provide, I mean, this isn't just Socotra. I like to call this a comprehensive list of all core data products, aka Socotra, because we're the first ones doing it. But here we have productized an object model that understands insurance and all those concepts. And above that, there's a configurable business layer where you actually configure your unique insurance product. Until you get to that level, it really doesn't care if you're insuring a car or a house or term life. The mechanics aren't actually that different. You fill out a form, you calculate a premium, you create a billing schedule, these sorts of things. Those do not change from one to another. What does change is, what is your writing system? What are your tables? What questions do you ask? Those sorts of things. Those are configured in a different level. And then you have this beautiful interface on the other side of which you can put anything you want. You can integrate with any system that you want. You can do it as an insurer. Your integrator partner can do it. And once again, we had with the phone example, these three interfaces. We do it the exact same way. You have your configuration, you have your open APIs, you have your default UI. If there's any other way to integrate with your core system, or interact with your core system, I should say, you're not dealing with a product. You're dealing with something custom. And unfortunately, every policy on Earth, outside of our customers, I should say, every policy on Earth is stored in custom software right now. And that's just not going to scale. That's not going to give us the things that we need in the future. So being productized, of course, is great. It gives us all those things, but you need to actually productize it in a way that's good. It actually has to do something useful for you. So what are some of the things it has to have? I could productize a bad version of the phone. It wouldn't have worked. So some of the things you need to have, of course, public APIs, like go to the website. You should be able to find the APIs right there. You should be able to integrate against them. And the APIs should also be well thought out. It doesn't do well to simply take whatever you developed internally with your internal mess and just open it up to the world. That's actually going to create a nightmare, and supporting is going to be horrible. You actually need to make APIs that were designed to be externally consumable. You also, and this is really key, you need to have a dynamic object model. The problem is, if you start with hard coding specific products and workflows, as soon as you want to make a change to it, it's a complete nightmare. I mean, we're dealing with a really basic example right now. If you have a hard-coded product that is auto insurance, for example, and this thing goes deep, you've integrated it with all the appropriate regulations, you have all of your workflows for all of your claims and all the ticketing systems, and you've hard-coded all this stuff, and then someone comes along and says, hey, I've got an idea. Let's charge auto insurance based on how many miles I've driven. And I've just pulled the bottom Jenga block out of the whole stack at that point. And the system completely falls apart if you don't have something more dynamic to handle it. So if you have a table, a database somewhere with a table that is like for a table that's called automobile, then you're not going to be able to handle this, because you're going to have a table and there's going to be a license plate column and make, model, year, VIN. That's great until suddenly you want to insure a drone and this thing can't help you. Or you add some new piece of information, you have a telemetry device ID, this thing can't help you. Dovetailing with that, data model centricity. How are these great systems made? And let's look at the phone as an example. So how do you build a tech platform? Well, one way is you start with a custom solution and you generalize it to others. This technique of building a custom solution for one customer and generalizing it into a product, I'm going to make a bold statement, has never generated a good software product in the history of software. Product companies make product, services companies sell services. They're very different disciplines. Starting with user experience and building downward. Could you imagine what your phone would look like if they just started with, I don't know, Snapchat, Uber, and Facebook, and made it for those 3 apps and thought it was going to somehow evolve to the rest? It didn't. It started with a well-thought-out data platform that was reflective of those things. You also can't start with one function and expand to the others. What I think is interesting, when I had all those devices that turned into my smartphone, the smartphone was not made by any of the companies that made any of those devices. It wasn't Canon, it wasn't Sony, it wasn't, I don't know, any of the ones that were on there. And it was companies, it was startups, it was companies that understood data platforms, that came in and saw a need and entered the consumer device space. So what you really need to do is start with a comprehensive data model and work your way up, or you're not going to end up with something that will support the needs of the future. So next is cloud, and I mean real cloud. This is, and for anyone here, if anyone here finds what I'm about to say new to them, forget everything else. This is the most important slide. Cloud is not a make versus buy decision on your servers. Cloud is not whether the server is in your office or across the street, any more than power grid is having a generator across the street with an extension cord. Nobody in the right mind would call that a power grid, and no one in the right mind should call it cloud when you take the same system that's made to be installed on-prem and you simply install it up on Azure or AWS or something like that. That is not cloud. Cloud entails so much more, like instant limitless scaling. If you suddenly get a spike, does it actually spin up more servers to handle it on the fly, or do you have to go provision more servers? Does it do upgrades automatically? You ask the vendor, how many versions of their software are running out there? How many versions right now are running? If they're cloud, the answer is 1. If it's more than 1, that's not a cloud infrastructure. They should have continual backups, perpetual new features automatically happening, and of course, high availability. Next is config management. This is something I'm actually very excited about. One of the biggest problems in insurance is that there's this huge multiplexing of functionalities. I mean, down in the United States, we're based out of San Francisco. I'm from Minnesota myself, so I've been joking all week that it's great to be down in Toronto. But there's in the United States, if you have 3 products sold in 50 states, that's 150 permutations of products. This sounds insurmountable. This is a multi-$100 million solution for the tier 1s to roll out. Now, down in Menlo Park, California, there's a company called Facebook that, for example, that operates in 180 countries with 100 languages and hundreds, if not thousands, of combinations of devices and browsers and versions that they have to support with every single new feature that they launch. It's literally an order of magnitude more complicated, and yet they're launching every day, all the time. It never says, come back later, we're upgrading, ever. It's all in the same version with multiple concurrent projects, dozens if not hundreds going on simultaneously to update the system, and harmlessly folding back in and launching, and where possible, where necessary, passing any regulatory needs in the various jurisdictions that they're operating. Now, I know you say, well, that's Facebook, that's social, that's not that, that's not as important as insurance. Well, here's a project. Go home, log in, and check how often your IT system is up, and check how often his Facebook is up. I mean, put your money where the performance is. Point is, this is a solved problem. This has been solved in the industry, and part of our mission is to bring this into insurance, where it can create a whole lot more good than pushing ads and swaying elections. So we've covered where we're going. All right, how are we going to get there? So I've got a handful of advice here. Obviously, I'd have to sit down with each of you to get extremely specific, so forgive the platitudes that follow. I'm going to do my best and hope we find something that's generally helpful here. Number 1, identify products when you're buying your software. Learn to understand the difference between products and services. This shouldn't sound that complex. In fact, I think that when we enter insurance, we actually already knew this and we had to unlearn it. I understand that. I understand the difference between, like, my car, which was purchased as a product, and my house, which was constructed for me. I understand those things intuitively. And then I enter the insurance industry, and we get all confused because the same company who creates the product is also doing the installation, those sorts of things. I understand that like Sony does not come to my house and install my stereo. Someone else does that. Microsoft does not come in and configure my Windows system for me. My IT person does that. I understand that person does not work for Microsoft. So we need to separate that out. Another thing, if you're trying to identify products, and we understand now the benefits of using products, that they're high reliability. I mean, craftsmanship is great. I love like a handcrafted suit. I don't want craftsmanship in my code anytime I can avoid it. I want something that looks the same as everything else whenever possible, so that it upgrades with everything else and has the quality because the R&D costs are spread across everyone. Find some product experience vendors. I mean, this one is pretty easy. Go search, find the company you're looking for, and look at the executive team. Has anyone, if they're claiming to be a product company, has anyone on the team ever worked for a company that shipped great software? If not, like ask them where they learned it. If they're a consulting company, they come from a consulting background, that's great. They're probably excellent consultants, and you should actually work with them. Look for those three interfaces. If it's actually a product, you interface through it with configuration, APIs, and perhaps a default UI. That's it. And then my favorite, if you want to know you're dealing with a product, just ask for an evaluation. I mean, software is easy to replicate. If you're using a cloud infrastructure, cloud SaaS product, or a platform as a service product, it's really easy to give someone a login. We can give you one in 30 seconds. Oracle gives free licenses. Salesforce will give you a free one if you just want to try it out. And if you call them up and say, I want to evaluate your product, what they should say is, fantastic. We'll give you an evaluation license key, and we'll give you documentation calls if you have any questions. If instead what they say is, 3 salespeople and PowerPoint will be there shortly, now you know what you're dealing with. So just ask. And when it comes to products, RFPs are not the way to buy products. You evaluate products. I did not issue an RFP for like this shirt. This thing actually says Socotra on it. This was actually a little more of an RFP project. We actually had to go around and find a vendor and imagine what the thing was actually going to look like. I did not issue an RFP for my phone. I did not issue an RFP for my car. I drove the car. And speaking on the other side as someone who is the vendor, I have a confession to make. We're horrible at RFPs. We're really no good at RFPs because someone says, hey, can your product do this, this? I'm like, well, here's the product. Just try it. Here's the product. Here's the documentation. It's like I feel like a car dealer, and people are coming in and asking me to give a list of places the car can drive to. It doesn't make any sense. Here's the car. Drive the car. If it's a product, evaluate it. If it's services, you necessarily have to do an RFP because they're showing you something that doesn't exist yet. If the thing exists, just look at the thing. Of course, I probably don't want to spend too much time on this, but like, go to the cloud, like seriously. But there's one prerequisite here. If you're going to go to the cloud, how to get there 3.1, you actually have to recognize the cloud. And this goes back to the things I mentioned earlier. I'm not going to enumerate them all because I think you heard them all. I don't see too many people on cell phones, so I think that you heard this a moment ago. You need to check out what's going on with the cloud and make sure that it's actually a cloud product. They didn't just install it somewhere else and give you a login. Not the same thing. Don't buy fake cloud. Get agile. This means a lot of things. I'm going to throw a few platitudes at you. I really don't want to spend much time on this because I really like being substantive. But experiment. Make your failures many and make them small. I was at Facebook a couple years ago, and they have a plaque on the wall of their conference room that says "Fail faster." Absolutely love that. Do things quickly, fail with them quickly, because the problem is, if you're talking about a new technology, you need to fail when the stakes are small. Don't wait until it's the $30 million RFP and you're 4 years into it or whatnot to find out that the technology is not going to work. I mean, it should be basic. But in order to actually implement it, you have to actually be able to stomach the failures. It's not enough to sit here and go, oh, yeah, I allow my employees to fail. Well, do you? You need to stop and think about that one, for a lot of folks do. And identify those experimentation opportunities. So let's say that you want to try some kind of you want to try drone insurance. Like, that's great. Try a new product. how many new technologies can you try at the same time with that product? Maybe you can try a new distribution method. Maybe you can try a new core. I'm a fan of that one. Maybe you can try putting that one in a blockchain integration. There's a lot of things that you can do there. Use those opportunities. Try it. Figure out what things work, what things don't. Swap them out. Do it when it's low quantity. And get operational as fast as you can. If you have a new idea for a product, this may sound on the surface like contradicts the previous one, but it'll tie together in a moment. If you have an idea for a new product, you can release that product on paper if you want to. If you're only selling 3 of them, you don't necessarily need to do anything advanced. Maybe you sell it on an underwriting system, but you're doing the claims manually at first until you get a little more volume. If you wait until the whole thing is ready, then you're going to end up. It's not a matter of whether you're going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. Make the mistakes early, and don't build too much before you figure out where you did things wrong, where you need to iterate, which is, of course, the next one. Go ahead, iterate fast. I'm going to use an example here. So we are core infrastructure, and invariably, when I'm talking with an insurer, before we even, after get past like saying our names, they're like, so you want us to throw out our core and just switch to you? No, that would be completely insane. There's a cloud metaphor here that I think works well with Agile. If I were instead working for Google with Google Cloud and I walked into a large enterprise and the guy said, so I know what you want. You want us to throw out all of our servers and move everything onto you. No, that's not what you want. That'd be an insane. That's going back to like the RFP way of doing things. This is not the space program. You do not need to do some massive thing like that. Instead, just try next time you want a server, just spin up one of ours instead of buying one. Next time you've got a rack of 20 servers and you wish you had 30, try putting the overflow there. If the latency is too high, then fine, maybe move the whole thing over. Find the little projects, get there gradually, and you can do the same thing with your core. One of the things I'm really passionate about is Agile core transformation. And I think that Agile core transformation is going to be one of the big themes of the next 5 years. It's just coming out right now in terms of like getting on people's minds. Because as I alluded to at the beginning, people are seeing all these great technologies and they're interested in these great technologies, but they need to find some way to cross this massive chasm when it comes to their back end. And along those lines, take a portfolio approach to your technology. Have multiple competing technologies you're evaluating at once. Have them at different levels. Maybe you spend 1 year at each of these levels. Be aware of what's out there. You're at a conference, you're doing that, great. But actually talk to these companies. Evaluate them. Get the trial evaluation. I talked about products. They should have evaluation versions. I mean, if you have an engineer who spent, a month trying a different technology every day, you'd have 22 technologies that you'd know pretty darn well. You'd have a day doing it for each one. And then also, even ahead of that, know what kind of company you are. This is something I think a lot of insurers don't stop to do. In all the hustle of you must have insurance, they don't stop to ask themselves, actually, how forward are they on technology? The core question, is technology a differentiator for you? And if so, which technology? What about the technology is actually differentiating? If your differentiator is something else, like maybe you have access to a great distribution channel that only you have, great, double down on that. I mean, frankly, go home. And I don't mean that sarcastically. Like, you do not need to be, don't worry about exploring all the new technologies. You can copy someone else doing it if that's not what you want to do. If you are a technology company, then you need to act like a technology company. You need to hire like a technology company. You need to be evaluating things and experimenting with things like a technology company. And you need to be talking with companies that have already solved the sorts of problems that you're already solving. I'd love to talk to some of you in that camp. And then anywhere in between. Then along those lines, that dovetails into extending your vision and understanding, like getting past like your current projects in the next 2 years to like what is the actual technology that you're going to have in 5 years. This goes back to that diagram that I had of the core and all the magical things it was going to do. Like what is your plan? Like seriously, what is your plan to get from here to there with the core that's going to support all of these other things? And what are you doing right now to evaluate technologies that are going to enable you to get to the place that you believe you're going to be in 5 years? Culture, of course, goes out even further, being agile, those sorts of things. But I'm not McKinsey, so I'm not going to talk about the culture that much. I'm big on the technology, and I'm big on getting stuff done. And then, of course, if you get there number 8, I'd recommend try Socotra. Maybe you'll like it. So I'm Dan Woods, and I think that we're right at time.